With the quickly growing advancements of game technology in the early 90s, video games entered a new frontier, the third dimension. This groundbreaking era of gaming represents one of, if not the most significant jump in video game graphical possibilities. This allowed developers to create fully realized environments capable of representing this new perspective. Players could, for the first time, explore worlds filled by true depth and verticality. We could finally engage in new cinematic storytelling and more complex level design, defined and enhanced by art direction to convey mood and setting. Of course, this came with challenges, as not all consoles of the time were created equally. The Nintendo 64, while having a more powerful CPU than the competition of the time, its cartridge-based games introduced very limited storage capacity. Meanwhile, the Sony PlayStation CD-based games had far more storage and higher quality audio, but since data was read off a disc in real time, it had significantly longer loading. Unlike today, where we've had decades of perfecting design in 3D, there simply weren't any rules at the time for what was the right or wrong way to create these new kinds of games. But with challenge comes innovation. Whether it's overcoming polygonal limitations by introducing pre-rendered images as backgrounds, or eventually redesigning controllers entirely during the middle of a console's lifetime to set new standards of controller interface. While this did spark a creative big bang of games focused on utilizing this new venture, it of course led to plenty of video game publishers looking to capitalize on their existing IPs. During the 5th and 6th console generations, developers were tasked with translating a vast number of their 2D properties into 3D adaptations and achieved wildly varied results. Nintendo had their work cut out for them, as we witnessed several of their IPs get this treatment. There was Mario making its revolutionary jump, no pun intended, with Super Mario 64 that set the standard for 3D navigation with this thing.
Baby, you make me wish I had 3 hands.
Well, I think you're doing just fine with 2.
I couldn't help it. There was The Legend of Zelda, receiving critical acclaim for its achievements in presentation, level design, and mechanics with the Ocarina of Time. Metal Gear Solid, the 4th entry in its franchise, would also change the landscape by popularizing the stealth genre and completely redefining cinematic storytelling in games. A still console-selling Sega would follow suit years later with its transition of its flagship mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog, in 1998's Sonic Adventure. There were even some straight-up duds, like the Crow City of Angels, Rascal, and yes, Bubsy 3D. But Capcom was also involved in this game design gold rush. There were titles like Mega Man Legends, a 3D action-adventure shooter that is very different from the 2D series that precedes it, Cannon Spike, which features a multitude of characters crossing over from several Capcom games, and Street Fighter EX, the first game in its series to feature 3D polygonal graphics. But Capcom didn't stop there. No, there was another. Ghosts and Goblins is a 2D platformer franchise that I've never really had the skill or patience to delve into outside of a few of the much easier spin-offs, such as the damn good Demon's Crest for the Super NES. The mainline entries are known for their insanely high level of difficulty and old-school gaming mechanics that Capcom has never steered away from. Its critical and commercial success, as well as its popularity, almost seems to be in spite of this. Regardless of its torturous challenges, it has always retained this appeal. Between the art style, animations, and simplistic yet charming story, there's a certain je ne sais quoi. And I want in. It just has this cutesy, creepy vibe that I really fuck with, you know? I just can't get into it. I mean, literally, I can't get past the first level. Go ahead and shame me for being a fake gamer or something, but I really do struggle with this one. I can't do it. And in 2002, Capcom's now defunct American development team, Capcom Digital Studios, released Maximo Ghosts to Glory for the PlayStation 2. Taking place in the same fictional universe as the Ghosts and Goblins and Gargoyles Quest games, Maximo Ghosts to Glory is a 3D hack-and-slash platformer. The project was led by David Siller and Mark Rogers, with the former actually having a hand in the series prior with the Game Boy Color version of Ghosts and Goblins, as well as being the producer of a little-known franchise called Crash Fucking Bandicoot. You know, the pivotal title that helped define 3D platforming itself. The character designs are done by Susumu Matsushita, a very popular manga artist recognized for his distinct style, which is inspired by Western comic art. His art has been frequently featured in several video game magazines like Jump and Famitsu. It's also showcased in the Adventure Island games. You can think of this as kind of like a genuine collaboration between his art and the Ghosts and Goblins franchise. Not unlike Studio Ghibli and Level 5 teaming up for the Ni no Kuni games, or the late and great legend that is Akira Toriyama, being responsible for the character designs in Chrono Trigger and the Dragon's Quest series. While it does draw heavy inspiration from the mainline Ghosts and Goblins series, this title is more of a spiritual successor / spin-off of sorts. Arthur's nowhere to be found in this. Instead, you play as King Maximo, who is returning from war only to find that an army of the dead is roaming around. His kingdom has been taken over by his once trusted advisor and friend Achille, who has, a la Bowser, also taken Maximo's wife Sophia for his own. Ain't that some shit? And this dude means business. In addition to him stealing your girl dog, Maximo learns that the ruling council is broken and its 4 sorceresses have been imprisoned in towers at the furthest reaches of his kingdom. To top all that, the guy offs you like immediately after you confront him, just like every self-respecting villain should when given the opportunity. None of this, "we're not so different, you and I," monologuing, no placing you in a death trap to assume your defeat, which inevitably allows you to escape. He gets his hands dirty and does the job himself with the magical equivalent of busting a cap in that ass. And I gotta say, I kind of respect this villain and how unabashedly evil the bastard is. Like, the game's only been on for like 2 seconds and he just straight up smacks a hoe right before murking the dude. Unfortunately for Achille, Maximo literally has death on his side. Sort of. Caught in limbo on his way to the afterlife, the Grim Reaper himself, simply named Grim here, comes to you and offers you another chance at life, given you help him out in the process. And this is one charming dude. I mean, just look at him. In media, death is usually portrayed as a gloomy, dark, broody butthead, you know? And here he is quipping and shit.
How can I trust you?
How can you not trust his face,
I may be biased since he's voiced by the ever-talented Carlos Alazraqui, who you may recognize as Deputy James Garcia from Reno 911, the original voice for Spyro the Dragon,
Oh, torture!
Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life,
For Rocco, he's kind of a Winnie the Pooh character, so he's a bit reluctant
and most notoriously, Dinkelberg. But I digress. You see, Achille has summoned an army of the dead, and to do so is literally drilling his way into the afterlife to steal spirits. Without these, Grim is effectively jobless. So in return for him resurrecting you, you have to kill Achille and stop him from continuing to harness both old and new souls for his evil plans. This isn't all fine and dandy though, as you actually have to pay the cheap bastard for his services after each game over. I suppose that's a fair trade, but more on that later. And don't let the fun and whimsical art style fool you either. This game is difficult. So, after being resurrected by Grim, you wake up in the Boneyard, a cemetery stage where you were presumably interred after you got. Your quest is to find the Sorceresses, discover the source of Achilles' power, rescue your betrothed, go to the Winchester, grab a pint, and wait for all this to blow over. Maximo is thrown into battle as you fight the undead through several gravesites and tombs in order to get to the first sorceress, Lenore. Not only do you have to contend with skeletons, zombies, ghosts, and these fucking mimics, but it's almost like the earth itself has been corrupted and is out to get you too with its multitude of earthquakes, pitfalls, and even lakes of lava, goddamn. This is where we are quickly tested by the game's tricky-ass platforming. While having a double jump is handy, the result isn't much easier than some of the trickier spots in Super Ghouls and Ghosts, which also had a double jump. This contorting environment is a design mechanic that stems from the franchise's beginnings too, often creating raised portions and random pitfalls to impede your progress. These points are expertly placed too, as they always seem to appear during my most confident and, in turn, reckless moments of forward momentum. It's a constant reminder to stay on your toes too, because you never know when the floor will just crumble beneath you. The game likes to be a cheap little son of a bitch too, because it tends to bait you there with goodies. To help you on your way, each stage has these devices called Wheel of Prizes! As you play, you'll collect coins which are used as currency here and other various parts of the game. Use these devices to spend coins and purchase stuff like abilities and power-ups. As this is effectively the training area, we're introduced to the game's combat. You have the most basic of moves. A horizontal slash is triggered by the square button, and an overhead vertical strike when pressing triangle. You can use these in conjunction with the left analog stick and traversal moves to perform alternative attacks such as a forward thrust, a spin attack, and my favorite, a downward strike that can kill knockdown enemies, a move that I dubbed Old Faithful. Maximo can also obtain shields which you use by holding the R2 button. By pressing circle, you can throw one in a way very similar to the Star-Spangled Bastard himself, Captain America. It even returns to you just like Cap's shield does. Just be careful, because unlike his vibranium shield, yours has durability that lowers over time and will eventually break. You'll start out with your typical baddies that only require these basic attacks and simple timing, but as you progress further in the game, you will be challenged and must mix up these attacks to circumvent clever and tricky enemy behavior. I'll delve into more detail later. In addition to the typical members of the undead that we'll be encountering, there are also ravens that will attempt to steal some of your coins that you've collected, and ghosts that will do their best to rob you of some of your spirits. Which reminds me, you really don't want to die too much in this game. You see, each time Maximo runs out of lives, you have to spend these death tokens you collect to return with 4 lives. But coins, spirits, treasure keys are all reset to their default values. You can give it as like an arcade game continue screen demanding quarters as you die, but charging more every few game overs. What's the most the game will charge? That, I don't know. I was never charged more than 4. I'm simply too good. Stupid. If you happen to run out of lives and you don't have enough of these tokens, then it's back to an earlier save or the beginning of the game. This definitely ups the challenge by giving it that retro difficulty. You can gain more tokens by collecting 50 of the aforementioned spirits, often hiding in objects like tombstones and some statues. You'll find various power-ups and abilities that can vastly increase Maximo's attacks and overall survivability. These can range anywhere from allowing him to gain a follow-up attack for 2-hit combos, which, trust me, is way more useful than it sounds, to an additional armor slot. Sword power-ups are powerful enchantments that buff your attacks, with Frostbiter being my favorite because it lets you freeze annoying enemies before finishing them off with ease. Dying will remove any and all of these power-ups that aren't contained in one of your lock spots, these empty spaces on your HUD, which will be filled up as you progress. Each ability you gain is assigned to one. To hopefully avoid dying, Maximo Ghost Glory has a tiered health system just like in the Ghosts and Goblins games that precede it. You can pick up these armor pieces to extend your hit points. When holding 3 of these armor pieces, you look like a dope Centurion. Having only 2 gives Maximo a standard chest piece. Reducing Maximo's armor to 1 will result in him running around in his boxers just like my boy Arthur did decades ago. While in the older titles, each armor piece equated to 1 hit point, totaling 1 or 2 hits before death, this game is a lot more generous by making each piece a mini health bar in itself, capable of taking a few hits before breaking depending on the attack. If you're able to pick up an additional armor while Maximo is at max health, he'll turn gold and gain temporary invincibility from attacks. These are really cathartic moments that reward you for playing carefully and allowing you to turn the tables on your enemies. Be aware that you can still fall off the map and die though, so don't get cocky. It's gonna get rocky. Gonna move down to the next jockey now. Duck! Fuck, I'm sorry. I do that sometimes. On that note, one of the most dangerous foes you'll encounter in this game is the goddamn camera. I fought this thing more than any enemy that stood in my way. As you roam around the levels, you'll find yourself wanting to rotate the camera to judge depth before a tricky jump, or look down a ledge to see if it's safe to descend. This is a 3D platformer after all. The issue is that you can't rotate the camera at all. Instead, the devs implemented a camera reset button that recenters it behind Maximo, a lot like how it worked in Ocarina of Time. This might be due to the fact that development of Maximo actually started off as an N64 title, before they realized that times were changing and moved development to the Dreamcast, but it wasn't long until they once again shifted consoles and opted for the PlayStation 2. I mean, that's cool and all when you have limited buttons like you do on an N64 controller, or a single stick like on the Dreamcast, but it is not acceptable when the DualShock 2's right analog stick isn't used at all. This camera setting can only be done when standing still, by the way, so fuck you if you're trying to get a grasp on your surroundings and happen to have a group of enemies around you. What the hell? I mean, I guess it's serviceable to aim Maximo in a particular direction. Hold still for a second, press L1 to center the camera to just the right angle, and then make your sketchy leap. But it baffles me why they couldn't just let me use a very vacant and ignored right stick. You can, however, hold R1 to enter a look mode to rotate Maximo's view, but I only found that useful when trying to scope out stuff in the distance when a level happens to let me branch out a bit. Luckily enough, this, among other things, is fixed in the sequel, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, after making our way to the end of the current stage, we're taught the flow of game progression. Levels take the form of hub worlds with 4 stages and an intro segment. Pretty much the goal of each stage is for you to get from point A to point B alive and destroying spirit collectors near the exit. They are shielded pillars that relay spirits back to Achille. They're heavily guarded by a final wave of enemies to defeat, kill the rush of baddies, smash the collector, and move on. Once back in the hub world, the remaining stages can be completed in any order by entering a master collector. In each hub, there are these circular pulls that allow you to save your game or travel back to a previously visited level. While helpful, be aware that saving costs you 100 coins. There were only a couple instances where I didn't have enough to save after completing a stage, which actually made the next areas tense as hell. It reminded me of trying to advance in the earlier Resident Evil games without having any of those sweet ink ribbons. While it does create moments of stress, it reinforces that the game really does want you to master each stage. You can revisit them freely and farm coins and other collectibles as you wish, hopefully getting better with each successive run, thus raising your tracked mastery of it. The combat and platforming design choices in the game really tap into that tug of war between risk and reward. Do I jump and get that gem? Do I save now and safely progress? Or should I save my coins and spend it on power-ups later? Regardless of the difficulty, I feel like there's always something you can do to mitigate damage and come up ahead. And if all else fails, get good. The first hub world is Tomb Tower, the location of this level's boss, Gastly Gus the Gravedigger, to which you gain access to after clearing the 4 stages and destroying the respective master collectors. He's a giant and slow-moving ogre, but carries a huge shovel as a blunt weapon. When you encounter him, he's digging a grave at the top of the tower. Simply do your best to avoid his ranged rock throws and shockwaves, and you'll make quick work of him. Give his exposed big toes the Old Faithful and he'll go down before you know it. I don't think that came out right. After defeating Gus and freeing Lenore, you are offered a choice of obtaining one of 3 rewards. A chance to save your game for free, an armor upgrade, or a kiss. Keep in mind that a kiss will take up an ability lock spot and is useless in-game, so it will make it a little harder for you. According to the booklet, forgoing the good stuff and getting a smooch from each of the sorceresses nets you a special reward at the end of the game. I wonder what it could be. Concept art? A true ending? My money's on a cold sore. The only problem with this is... Actually, I'm pretty sure they're just engaged, but clearly in a committed relationship. I mean, you do what you gotta do, dude, but this doesn't feel right when I think about it, which clearly I'm overdoing. After the first rescue, you're instructed... Wait, hold on. Aren't these women basically my co-workers as the Kingdom's Council? Alright, I'm done. Let's go. After the first rescue, you're instructed to continue on your path and save the remaining 3 thoughts. Meanwhile, we see Achille being updated by one of his undead generals. Disappointed that he failed to kill Maximo, he punishes the general by resurrecting him back to life, with a completely new body and everything.
I'm alive!
Guards,
Yes, my lord!
take the general away and torture him until he dies. Maximo, your fate will not be so pleasant.
Hard fucking core. Excuse me. The next area is the Great Dank, a swampy zone, and the location of the next sorceress, Mamba Marie. This area is filled with overgrowth you must overcome as you navigate your way through wooden huts, swampy lakes containing tar pits, poison-spitting plants, and zombie crocodiles? Sounds like one of those intentionally bad Sci-Fi Channel movies, huh? Still cool, though. Despite the swampy aesthetic, there's actually a lot of variety here throughout each stage. You'll eventually come across these lost ruins, flowing rivers that must be crossed in a vein similar to Frogger, lush and dense jungle, and a village complete with a sort of temple area. While playing, you may have noticed that as you plat your forms, that these chests will occasionally spring up from the ground after landing on particular spots. This happened in earlier Ghosts and Goblins titles as well, but while those were 2D games with somewhat predictable chest locations, these 3D environments can be trickier. The game rewards you for being thorough. Just be careful when opening chests, since they can sometimes be these mimics instead. Nothing's worse than hoping for a much-needed armor piece or bag of coins, only to be greeted with a bite instead. With no visible tell indicating a trap, they could sometimes get a pretty cheap hit on you. Dying and returning to previously opened chests might trigger these to be in their place instead, so pay careful attention for chests you've already opened on a previous run. After clearing these swampy stages, Maximo causes a lift lower which takes him to a hut at the top of a giant tree at the hub's center. This is where we find Bokor Laba, a crazed witch doctor. He's capable of shrinking Maximo before attempting to step on you. Dude also has these voodoo dolls that can and probably will fuck you up. Turn his magic on him and take advantage of his moments of vulnerability as you can. He'll shrink down to normal size and then split himself into multiple copies that can be damaged. Before long, he's defeated and Mamba Marie is saved. Lay one on her, and be on your way to the next area, the Graveyard of Ships. We arrive at a frigid wasteland, which is the resting place for pirate ships forever frozen in ice. Be wary of the undead crew, ice-spitting plants this time, and abominable snowmen. This is where we rescue the next sorceress, Aurora Lee. This area will challenge your platforming skills, as there are several sinking platforms, moving icebergs, and derelict ships. This is where the combat quickly ramps up, as enemies will force you to mix up your tactics. For example, getting comfortable with the forward sword thrusts and finishing off enemies with Old Faithful got you through the first levels just fine, but it's here where you will fight skeleton pirates that are already impaled by a sword. They go down just like normal enemies, but this means that Old Faithful will hurt you in the process. Baby, don't do this to me. The best strategy here is to wait for them to get back up to say hi to a few more sword swings, or simply find a way behind these assholes, which makes them fall forward onto their stomachs. While they still are impaled, the sword's blade is facing down this time, which means you can use Old Faithful again. Speaking of pains in the ass, if you see a bomb-throwing enemy, just stop, think, and carefully assess the situation, because it's nearly impossible to take them down without receiving some sort of damage, unless you handle them just the right way. Running head-on will result in a massive hit, often destroying an entire armor piece in the process, or outright killing you. The game likes to think it's being cute later on too, often grouping one with different enemy types, which, believe me, forces you to rethink your approach. I recommend you throw your shield at them from a safe distance and getting the hell out of dodge, since they tend to explode on death, which has a surprisingly large reach. There are stretches in gameplay where you have to do this often, and while enemies do drop health for your shield on occasion, there are times where you'll be completely out and shieldless. This means either avoiding enemies that counterattack, or eating the damage as you kill them. It can be remedied by getting a sword power-up and simply overpowering the undead bastard, but this is often a random drop or has to be purchased, not something you can readily count on. It creates a dynamic of utilizing your handful of attacks with various strategies that certain enemies require to defeat, especially when in groups. It reminds me of the on-the-fly thinking combat chess analogy that the latest Doom games use when approaching their combat. Different enemies require different approaches, and you prioritize based on the current situation.
Sizing up foes, improvisation, both with your weapon and how you navigate, and lastly, putting the enemy on their heels. We viewed enemies as combat puzzles, and the solution was the arena, your arsenal, and how you chose it.
The game is filled with paradigm shifts like this, which make you reconsider your current strategy, and takes what appears on the surface as simple mechanics and encourages you to think on the fly to overcome whatever bullshit the game decides to throw at you. I'd say that this is the core experience and what makes the game challenging in the end, and in turn, fun. It's mean, but not so mean that it makes you rage quit. I'm looking at you, Ghosts and Goblins. After fighting your way through stages filled with caves, iced over lakes, and a frozen castle, you eventually arrive at an underwater base where Maximo encounters our next boss, the ghostly pirate, Captain Cadaver. He attacks by shooting at Maximo and swiping him with a giant anchor. Though appearing tough, his weak spot is his stereotypical peg leg, which can get stuck in one of the floor grates in the area. After exploiting that and busting this ghost, you get to swap spit with Aurora. But before she gets to point you in the right direction, Aurora and the other two sorceresses acknowledge that they can't really do anything without their fourth. That's when my boy Achille shows up like a WWE heel. He's holding the next sorceress, Stephanie, hostage.
And hand over the key to my own...
No! Achille!
Hey, Maximo! Okay, who died?
Grim then appears and informs everyone that Stephanie's been murdered by Achille in order to hinder our progress, and her soul's been sent to the underworld. Damn, this is kinda dark. I mean, the game is rated T after all, but with an art direction like this and still appearing somewhat kid-friendly, I just didn't expect to move like that. Luckily for us, the personification of death itself is capable of sending us to the underworld to go get her. Maximo arrives at the realm of spirits and continues his search for his friend. He encounters mechanical torments filled with swinging pendulums, saw blades, and bear trap-like platforms. There's just a lot of dope imagery here. While not the demon world you might be familiar with from the Ghosts and Goblins and Gargoyles quest games, I like to imagine this is the human equivalent. Demons and evil spirits will try to end your journey towards Stephanie's soul. This place is pretty metal looking too. It kind of reminds me of that first God of War title when Kratos briefly ends up in the underworld himself. Like, imagine trying to replicate heavy metal album art, but in this cartoony and somewhat cute art style. Caves and dead ends are made up of what looks like skulls and bones of ancient creatures, accented by a metallic industrial vibe with steam pipes and spinning gears that really mess up your timing of jumps. There's even these trampoline-like brains you use to reach higher areas. I'm pretty into it. Bravo, Capcom. Aesthetically, this place absolutely slaps, but holy shit, this world definitely contains the hardest platforming segments in the entire game. In both of my playthroughs, I died here the most. I didn't even get a game over until I got here. Bottomless Pits is the name of the game. Each level is made up of these floating chunks of land connected by gears, rotating blades, pipes, and even moving platforms. You will fall to your death several times here. The giant spinning gears I mentioned really do tend to disorient you and even affect the trajectory of your jumps. Your momentum is influenced by their movement and it reduces any confidence you may have in your jumps. You really have to be on your A game here, so be careful. New enemies include these pig devils. There are these short little anthropomorphic pigs wielding these cartoonishly giant hammers. They slam them down forcefully and create powerful shockwaves. They only need a few low horizontal slashes since they're too short for any other attacks. Or if you catch them when they're raising their hammer, they are vulnerable to vertical slashes as well. You'll run into these man-sized goat devils who charge at you and try to ram Maximo. They're easily dodged though, so just be careful if they're in a group. The latest and greatest enemy here are these doomed souls that, holy shit, actually managed to freak me out a little. I'm not entirely sure why. Is it the weird ghost moan that they make? The contorted face that looks very reminiscent of Edward Monk's The Scream? I didn't even know what the hell this ghost face looking bitch did for the longest time since I was way too scared to let it get close to me.
Holy shit, it's ghost face!
But yeah, it wasn't long before I found out that these assholes just drop you off the map. You can shake them off by repeatedly pressing the cross button, but be careful, because it can pull you out far enough to where it doesn't really matter. If they do let go, try to double jump your way back to land. In general, the enemy behavior in the underworld isn't tricky per se, but I noticed that some of the enemies have about 3 times as much health as the earlier stages. It didn't feel consistent, but I know these zombies took a lot more damage before being put down for good. After some time, you run into Lord Gutterscum, the vilest of all the underworld demons, and the boss of the Realm of Spirits. He holds Sephane's soul captive. A large and rather heavy-looking demon. I love that he's able to fly with his cute and tiny little wings. Just look at them. Look at them!
Look at them.
Despite his intimidating slime-spitting and fire-breathing attacks, simply make your way towards his, rear and beat his fat ass. Just keep moving in zigzag to avoid his ranged attacks. For fire, make sure you're fairly close to him in order to dodge the fire's wide cone. As you progress in the fight, he'll start to break the floor and take you down to lower levels. Simple enough. Kill him, save Sephane, and get that last kiss. You now have everything you need to take on Achille, we just have to get to him. We arrive at Castle Maximo, now under the rule of Achille. It becomes an all-out assault on the undead army. Maximo encounters Achille's most dangerous guards and dungeon dwellers here, but there's not enough to stop him. He utilizes a catapult in order to get past the castle's defenses and fights his way in. This twisted castle is filled with several traps, dungeons, a hedge maze, and more. You'll eventually run into these goddamn Dark Knights. They're these big shock troopers that carry a massive morning star and act as bouncers.
Come on! Fuck up!
Behind them is a force field that will not let you through until he's defeated. Supposedly, he has no physical being except for his yellow eyes and just inhabits armor that's magically held together. This big bastard's invincible to all attacks except for a few specific methods. He's particularly vulnerable to shield attacks and downward strikes. He'll start to wobble, which is your sign to hit him again. His armor drops down, but his helmet remains in the air. Immediately jump and hit it a few times, and just rinse and repeat until he's dead. Not particularly tough on his own, but like previous levels, he's grouped with other enemies. Usually the fucking Grenadiers. So while you're dealing with the Dark Knight, you'll also be dodging bombs, so good luck. Another new enemy here is the hilariously named Man Who Thinks He's a Dog. These long-forgotten prisoners are locked in the deepest recesses of Castle Maximo. You'll find him haunching and howling, but when he spots you, he clamps his arms around your ankle and pins you in place. This leaves you completely vulnerable to any other enemies in the vicinity. At long last, Maximo arrives atop the Great Drill and confronts Achille.
All those souls, all that power, it's all mine!
I won't let it happen!
Oh, I already have.
Using an orb containing all the stolen souls, he activates his newfound power and attacks. He creates a barrier to defend himself and summons a giant head to attack. After avoiding enough attacks and retaliating when his shield is down, the fucker ends up summoning these generators that turn him into a giant monster and constantly heals him while active. Simply, and I mean simply, attack the generators to stop this process and he'll revert back to his normal form. Rinse and repeat this process until he eventually gets frustrated enough to attack with his scepter. At this point, the fight's basically over. Just dodge his super obvious and easily avoidable attacks to finish him off. Once he's finally defeated, we're then free to rescue the lovely Sophia.
I feared you were dead. What happened to Achille?
Gone.
Excellent. My plans are nearly complete.
In a shocking turn of events, we find out that she's really a demon and was using Achille this whole time to gain power for itself.
And now, the only thing left is to devour you!
Wow, what a twist.
Sophia transforms and the last boss fight ensues. This part of the game actually managed to creep me out. The shift in tone gave me whiplash. Again, I have to say that for a game with this dark but still somewhat whimsical art direction, I love how it manages to retain this grim atmosphere. The room becomes pitch black, only illuminated by flashes of lightning. During the flashes, we can see the demon scurrying around the area like a fucking xenomorph or something, before rushing Maximo. Time your attacks well enough, and you'll be able to defeat the demon once and for all. This is a cool twist on the typical save the princess trope that I really didn't expect. Grim approaches a mourning Maximo and company to congratulate him on not only saving his kingdom, but that of Grim's underworld as well.
My kingdom is in ruins. And Sophia? Dear God, Sophia.
He tells Maximo that the demon was just in disguise and that Sophia is actually still alive. The Sorceresses agree to take watch over the kingdom and allow Maximo and Grim to set out on another adventure to save her. The story, while still somewhat basic and by the numbers, managed to weave a pretty interesting tale. I really enjoyed Maximo and Grim's adventure, and I absolutely loved how unapologetically evil the cartoonish Achille was. There were a few genuine surprises too, like the murder of Saphine and the twist at the end with Sophia. As formulaic as the setup is, I really didn't see that one coming. So, I defeated Achille, saved the kingdom, rescued and committed infidelity with the 4 sorceresses before finally stopping the demon in charge. The reward for my efforts are... God damn it, it is an art gallery. I mean, that's cool. I always dug these in other games. I was just expecting a little more. I mean, in a game where you have to pay to save, and when getting a kiss from a sorceress means I lose an ability slot, it could and should have been a bit more of a substantial reward. Like, wouldn't it be dope if we got to play the game again as Arthur or something? A twist on the older games that made you play twice before actually beating it. Or unlocking a 2D minigame in the same vein as Ghosts and Goblins, but with Maximo instead. Just something more than a few images I could just Google in 2 seconds. An additional aspect to love about this game is the wonderful soundtrack. The game's score is composed by the legendary Tommy Tallarico Studios, founded by, well, Tommy Tallarico. This guy's had such a major impact in the industry. Seriously, look up his work. A game composer, musician, designer, TV personality, creative director, and producer. The dude's portfolio was stacked and just needed to be said. Oh shit. Well, maybe not. As far as I can tell, it was actually composed by Todd Dennis, Chris Rickwood, Howard Uliate, and Shane Keep. That doesn't take away from the fact that this is a great soundtrack though, so moving on. Ghost to Glory utilizes that extremely familiar motif from the earlier Ghosts and Goblin games throughout. You know the one. It's effectively a series of remixes of that original theme, but listening to this orchestral recreation is just astounding sometimes. It even plays on your expectations, often shifting cues and taking creative spins on recognizable melodies. Each song expertly ties well with its respective level. With the ice area sounding chill with its soft vocalizations, chimes, and horn instruments, it gives it this distinct Viking or pirate vibe. And the swamp level amps it with the banjo and heavy percussion. I think there's even a theremin, and it brings this mysticism and voodoo to mind. I can't help but be reminded of how Super Mario World soundtrack is basically one song that's remixed on a per level basis. I don't know, I just really dig that kind of stuff. It gives the game this layer of consistency without sounding repetitive, and it should be commended for it. Somehow each level sounds fresh by recognizing that adds this charm to it that I feel more games should try to achieve. One of the criticisms I heard in this game is the music though. I guess a lot of people weren't really vibing with the fact that it is that one song over and over, and I've even heard people describe it as repetitive, and I just have to strongly disagree. I'd say it's consistent. If you couldn't tell already, I'm pretty fond of the game. Even though it can be somewhat mean to me, it's one of the most rewarding gaming experiences I've ever had. I recommend it to anyone who's a fan of retro games, challenging games, or just curious. I will be honest though, the bosses are somewhat of a letdown. As you might have noticed, I really did just breeze through them when describing them, just because there really wasn't a lot to them. They look cool and have a ton of charm in their designs and animations, which I absolutely adore, but they're all boiled down to just exploiting a very easy to find pattern, not unlike the standard enemies leading up to them. In fact, I had a significantly harder time just getting to the motherfuckers. I died more in the standard levels. Even the last boss only got me like one time before I beat the game. I mean, they're tricky at first since you're just flailing around in fear, wondering what to do, how they move, when to attack, all that jazz. However, after a couple attempts, the pattern becomes crystal clear and you can probably get by with little trouble and possibly no damage done to Maximo at all. The third boss in particular is such a pushover since all you have to do is orbit around his right side and whack him into a grating after he misses his extremely telegraphed attack, then doing a low horizontal swing to a stuck peg leg. And that was only really hard because I never did the crouch attack in the game prior and kind of forgot I could do it. Just rinse and repeat 5 times and get the fuck out. I know what they were going for with the whole specific pattern recognition and reactive gameplay, creating a sort of puzzle. It just seems like the boss fight should match the white knuckle moments the rest of the game dishes out. These are your bosses, dude. Challenge me. And speaking as someone who carefully saved before all the bosses, I almost came to see them as rest spots themselves. Not something you want to think of during what are supposed to be the grand set pieces of your game, but expect to die. A lot. While not quite the scrotum-splitting kicks to the junk that Ghosts and Goblins is, it's still a stern flick to the testes. No major damage done, but enough pain to keep you in line. And despite all this, I can't stop playing the damn thing. I wonder what that says about me. Personally, I attribute the urge to keep going to the simple mechanics and tough but fair gameplay. I've heard a lot of people describe the game as one of the hardest games on the platform and, in some cases, even harder than the 2D games that spawned it. I have to strongly disagree. Like, it's challenging, but I wouldn't necessarily call it hard. Cheap? Yeah, on occasion, but never really that difficult. It's the Dark Souls of 3D platformers. The game does a fantastic job at easing you into the experience, so you play it by its rules. There were never any moments where I felt completely helpless or had that sweaty feeling that a lot of other games like Shinobi or God Hand cause. I feel like most deaths were my fault, and either due to recklessness on my part or simply just not understanding enemy attack patterns and platforming too quickly and confidently. There are times where you'll have a good rhythm going, only to have the floor beneath you crumble away without warning. Usually when going for suspiciously placed coins or pickups. I guess it's my fault for being greedy, but hell, in a game where you have to pay to save or gain equipment, every coin counts. But even these negative points can be reduced when you realize that the game is designed for you to learn and master each stage. Almost like a puzzle, you have to find the optimal paths, timing, combat strategies to eventually raise the level's mastery to 100%. You're not supposed to save after each stage, and if you do, you're encouraged to replay them, which more than replenishes your supplies and time. In some cases, you might feel better off to say screw it and just go back to a previous save, instead of paying Grim to be resurrected. This way you can at least keep any keys, spirits, and gold since they're reset upon resurrection, but this would definitely be missing the point of the game. Just take your time, stay paranoid, and familiarize yourself with paths, threats, and collectible locations on each attempt. My biggest takeaway is to tread carefully, regardless of your immediate situation. It only takes one bad decision to completely fuck your momentum. Maximo Goes to Glory has even inspired me to go back and give the earlier titles in the franchise another shot. Perhaps I'll stream my attempts on Twitch soon. For anyone who's interested in trying out Maximo Goes to Glory, be brave, be careful, and have fun. Do you have any memories of playing this game? Have I by any chance motivated you to try it yourself? Does it look interesting to you at all? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts on the game and this video. If you happen to enjoy this, please consider giving that like button the old faithful, and maybe even subscribing to the channel. If, for some reason, you still want more of me, then you can always drop by my streams on Twitch, where I'm currently playing through the entire Resident Evil franchise. Link is in my bio. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.